Okay, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today. So my goal is to move forward a little bit into a discussion on shoeing equipment. Lately, we've been in some heavy topics, kind of starting off a little bit of a refresher, talking about balance, both from a dorsal palmar, medial lateral balance, as well as just how to assess it on a horse, angles a little bit, and overall generalizations that I want you guys to be familiar with if you are ever trimming a horse in the future, or you're watching and assisting your farrier, making sure they're doing things correctly as well. And so last time we talked about biomechanics of the distal limb and then a little bit on corrective therapeutic shoeing. I told you I might entertain the idea of doing something with dissection, but really it's not feasible. Typically we'd be working on some frozen thawed legs, and I'll let you guys dissect those. You will all get the opportunity to do that when you take disease with Dr. Hess, and so do take advantage of that with the distal limb. I've decided instead we'll bump everything up one week. We'll talk about shoeing equipment this week, the process of trimming and shoeing itself next week, followed by our demo with shoeing the English sport horse. We'll do something like a show jumper. And then next we'll do a demo with the Western performance horse. We'll look at some reiners. And then I think we'll just do something fun at the end in that last lecture, perhaps about working on the anvil and some forge work. And so today with shoeing equipment, I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit. I want to go through a PowerPoint with you guys, but I also have got my farrier tools beside me as well. And I just want to be able to show you a few things best I can as we kind of walk through them. And so this is just an overarching list of shoeing equipment that you guys will likely encounter. Many of these you've likely heard of. I would recommend a handful of these, even if you're not going to go out and be a farrier. Keep some of them in your tack room around the barn. If you have a horse that throws a shoe so you can clean up a foot, or maybe you have a horse that has sprung a shoe and you need to pull it all the way. I think these are good things, even coming out of the practicum class, that you have somewhat of a knowledge, that we haven't been able to do it in person, but you feel a little more comfortable with what goes into things like, hey, I need to pull a shoe, etc. And always feel free to ask, and I'm happy to elaborate on those. And so we'll talk about all of these in more detail, from the hoof knives to the rasps to the nippers, more of the shoeing tools, again, from clinchers to that clinch block, clinch cutters, you name it. At the end, we can talk a little bit about some various consumables, various shoes, nails, pads, etc. And again, hopefully you guys will walk away with this a little bit more well-versed than previously. And so starting off, I want to talk about some hoof knives. This is one of those essentials that you are going to have on you or in your shoeing box anytime you are trimming a horse. And so this is really just, as we say, used to pare away that dead sole from the hoof, remove any ragged parts of the frog. They do make them in right-handed and left-handed versions. And so I've just got a classic hoof knife that sits right here. This is not an expensive one. You can get pretty expensive ones that run you $50, $60 plus for a single hoof knife, and you can get much cheaper ones as well. This is a pretty, it's kind of a medium blade. It's a pretty narrow blade. You can get them wider than this. But this is a right-handed hoof knife because I'm right-handed. You can get them in right-handed and left-handed versions. Obviously, if I was to pick up a left-handed one, it wouldn't do me much good. It's something that you hold in your hand like this, okay? A little bit awkward, but that's the shape of the handle like this. And so you're holding it in your hand like this, and really it's this C shape or U-shaped motion that we're using on that horse's sole to kind of pare that out a little bit, okay? And so that's why it easily holds in your hand like that. This is regular blade, as I mentioned. You can also get them in a loop knife that you see in that top picture on the PowerPoint. This is what that loop knife would look like. This is great for going down the commissures of the frog and basically cleaning that out, any dead tissue that's along each side. Sometimes they don't clean very well in terms of they get some various areas of growth that don't allow them to move dirt out the heel region. And so we can just take this right down that commissure on each side, and that loop is great at being able to clean that out. And so I really do like having a loop knife on. We'll talk about chaps here at the end and the purpose of those protecting your legs. But the nice thing about any set of shoeing chaps is that you're always going to have knife holders on the side. Obviously, if I already pulled them out to be able to show you guys, but this very easily just sits in, and you're working up under the horse, you have easy access to your hoof knife that you can then pare away that sole or frog or anything else, okay? you do need to sharpen them regularly. A good hoof knife that is sharp makes all the world of difference, especially if it's summertime. It's pretty dry out. These horses' feet are hard as a rock. You're going to want a sharp hoof knife. And so most farriers have a grinding wheel, buffing wheel on their trucks. You can go over and easily resharpen that. They also make handheld sharpeners. And so this is not a fancy one. This is just a handheld sharpener that would sit right here. We can easily come over and just move across this blade. Think much like you're sharpening a kitchen knife. But we can sharpen our hoof knives the same way, and that's just made exactly for that. So hoof knife, essential thing that you should always have around. Again, obviously every farrier would, but I suggest you have one in the tack room laying around the barn. A great thing that you guys will likely use in the future. Rasp will be the next thing to talk about. After we've paired out that sole, we're not quite in order on a lot of these tools. That's okay. Next week we'll talk about the actual process of trimming and shoeing. But we would nip away any of that hoof wall, and after we've used our nippers, again, it might not be perfectly level. Hopefully we're pretty level across the whole thing. We're not low in the quarters. But we're going to use our rasp to make that a completely level bearing surface all over the top of that hoof wall. And so the way that we do that is just, as we said, with our rasp. This is a rasp sitting right here. You see a few pictures there. One thing to note on that rasp is you have a coarse side like this, and then you have a fine side like this, okay? So no surprise that coarse side takes off more hoof and more material. Fine side takes off less, okay? The biggest thing to teach, and I wish I had you guys in class and we could get you up under a few horses, but the toughest thing is getting people to not push too hard and to let this kind of float across the hoof. It's sharp enough. It'll cut. You don't need to press super hard. Rasp is another key thing that I would have laying around your tack room. And so maybe you have a horse that has a little bit of flare. They've chipped a little area of their hoof off. You can easily take a rasp over and clean that up, round it off a little bit. With this, it only cuts in the forward direction. And so when you're leveling off that foot, we're going to move in kind of this circular motion around the foot because we want to make it level all the way across it, okay? We don't want this seesawing motion back and forth in, say, just the heel region, okay? And so we're going to kind of move it forward, and it only cuts, again, in forward direction, so it's kind of forward, picking it up, moving it around in a circular motion as we do level that foot. A couple of things about the rasp is you want to make sure you have one that is only made for or only used on the actual hoof itself, and then another one that can be used for nails or metal, okay? And so this is one that I use on the hoof. I designate that with this blue grip and blue handle. You see these same handles up in the top right corner of that PowerPoint. These are great handles. They're a little tough to get back off, but that means they stay on well. And I really do like them. But this is the one designated for my hoof wall. And then I've got another one that's designated with a red handle that I might use on nails or steel or anything like that. We'll talk about removing clinches. A couple ways you can remove clinches. One of the ways you might do that is to rasp them off, okay? And if you're going to grind on nails or anything like that with a rasp, we're going to do that with this one made from metal. I've also got one sitting on the anvil. We'll go look at the anvil and anvil stand here in a bit. But if you have steel that comes hot out of the forge and you want to take a little bit of steel off, you can take a rasp to it. And when it's red hot, you can definitely take material off, but we want to make sure we don't use our rasp that is only made for hoof wall. We use the one that's made for nails and metal. A couple other things out there. There are wooden handles as well. And so it doesn't matter to me what you get, but you'll notice that next point says always use a handle. The key aspect there is, and really it's for your safety, if you look at this, we'll unscrew this wooden handle right here, maybe. And so as we unscrew this wooden handle, what this looks like when you go buy a new rasp is just like so, okay? And all too often I see a rasp in somebody's tack room that they've got laying around, and they're gonna go, again, work on a foot that, again, a horse has sprung a shoe, and they're just gonna clean it up a little bit. They don't have a dang handle on. Please spend the $2 for a handle. This is a great way to injure yourself. And so, you know, you're holding the rasp like this, and you're trying to, again, rasp on that horse's foot. All it takes is a little bit for that point to go into the palm of your hand and cut that. And so please do put a handle on this end. They are made to have a handle there. These just simply thread on. Those plastic ones that you guys saw in the beginning, the red and the blue, just push on and they stay on firmly. But do put a handle You'll notice on the top of this rasp, there's no teeth here. That's meant so that you can hold on to that region as you're leveling and working across that foot, okay? But do note where your hands are at. The new rasp especially extremely sharp, okay? And yes, I'm only touching straight on this. I'm not rubbing my hands across it either way, and I'm being cautious not to do that. Again, if you do that, you'll very easily turn your hand to hamburger. And so you gotta be careful when you're kind of throwing this rasp around, grabbing it from this end, pulling, etc. They are sharp. Usually in the Farrier Practicum class, sometimes I'll go out and buy new rasps for us to utilize, but I'll trade them out with some of the Farriers and take some of theirs that have been dulled up a little bit, because sometimes you guys don't need those brand new ones per se. Other one I have sitting around is still a save edge rasp, but it's got a much larger footprint to it. And so if you looked at the size of this rasp as compared to this one right here, you notice this one's much bigger, okay? More surface area here, okay? This one works great for draft horses, or even just some people will try it and they'll like it just for leveling out the foot, because again, you got more surface area. It's easier to kind of get that flat plane across the bottom of the foot, making sure we're not low in a certain area. And so again, personal preference, whatever suits your fancy, you guys are welcome to utilize. There's different wooden grips. You can see this one's longer than the other. You can still designate with the wooden grips which one is your good rasp and which one is made for the nails as well. But a rasp is another key thing that you're going to have, and I recommend. And so the nippers would be the last of those three pieces that when it comes down to just trimming a horse's foot, again, hoof knife, nippers, rasp, those are going to be the three items that you guys are going to utilize. And if I had, we'll add one more to that list here shortly, but 3 or 4 items that I would recommend you guys have around or in the tack room, these would all be on that list. So nippers are, as you guys probably are familiar with, used for nipping the extra growth along that hoof wall. And so, you know, our horse hasn't been trimmed for 8 weeks. They're a little bit longer in the toe. Maybe they're stumbling a little bit. But even if they're not, we're going to take a little more toe, a little less heel, and we're going to end up increasing that angle. And we're going to do that by nippers, okay? And so nippers, we're going to start at the heel. We're going to take a little bit of hoof wall. We're going to work all the way around, and then we're going to get to the toe. We're going to take a little bit more of a bite, and then back to the other heel. That's all accomplished with our nippers, and then we'll go back with our rasp and make that a perfectly level surface. We can get pretty close with our nippers, but that's just part of that finishing. And so they come in a variety of lengths. When we're talking about variety of lengths, really we mean the length of the reins right here, okay? Do buy good quality nippers, especially for your hoof wall nippers. We'll talk about some nail nippers here momentarily. Doesn't really matter that your nail nippers are of great quality, but your hoof nippers, you do really want them of good quality. The best on the market out there are GE. These are GE nippers. You don't have to go spend that. They're probably likely close to $300 for a set of nippers, but do buy something that is good quality. A few things to note with nippers and pay attention to is probably tough to see, but right here is essentially the stop, okay? And you can see steel is touching each other. When you open these nippers, the stop is opening as well. And so the key here is that when these nippers close all the way, the stop, the steel actually touches. If this is not machined properly on a poor set of nippers, I can squeeze this handle all I want. These nippers are not going to jump on top of each other. And so this is an extremely sharp blade that you see right here. It's an easy piece of work to go in and trim along that hoof wall, but it cuts very nicely, okay? If you have a cheap set of nippers and the stop is not machined correctly, when you close and you continue to squeeze through that hoof wall, these will jump up on top of each other in terms of your blade, and they will dull each other. And to a point, you're no longer easily cutting through that hoof wall. You're just kind of crushing through it and then tearing it off, okay? And you don't want that. And so these are, again, good quality here. The rivet is also tight, and so there's no real play in this. That's something else you'll notice in a cheap pair of nippers versus something that's good. We'll also talk about anytime you guys are buying any tool, whether it's crease nail pullers or nippers or pull-offs, etc. I would tell you you want good drop on that, but it especially holds true with your nippers. We talk about something having a good easy drop to it. Basically, it just means holding it up, and if I was to let go of this bottom rein right here, it easily just falls open, okay? And so you guys can see we've got very easy drop on that. If you go out and you buy something that is a $50 pair of nippers, more often than not, they're pretty cheaply made, and it's going to take 2 hands to pry that open and then close it, etc. Not really what you want. You want something that's very easy in your hands to be able to open and then trim along that hoof wall. And so again, these are just your standard nippers, but again, do buy something that is of good quality. A few other nippers that exist, one of which would be half round nippers. And so these are also GE. You can see a picture of these in the middle over here on the PowerPoint. But these nippers right here, you can see by the curvature, as we hold that in front of the camera here, you can see by the curvature there, they're a little bit different than those straight nippers I just showed you. These are great for a horse that maybe is not very concave in the sole. We talked about that hoof knife a little bit ago. We're going to paring out any dead sole, really trying to make sure it's that concave surface, okay? But maybe they've got quite a bit of sole that's just taken all day to pare out with your hoof knife. You can get much more of a bite with these half-round nippers into the sole sometimes, just to start to make it concave. Same that you would do, you're not taking any more, same that you would do with your hoof knife, but this gives you a little bit of a head start, and then you can finish it and clean it up with your hoof knife. Other use for this, some people will cut in the notches for clips, and so if you're pulling clips off of a shoe, and maybe we're doing that show jumper or something else, again, we can cut little notches with these half rounds, okay? So great clip nippers to have around, not necessary, but they do come in handy. And then the last pair of nippers that you do need, and these are different than the first ones I showed you that are made only for the hoof wall, is a set of nail nippers. You can see these are quite a bit smaller than if we were to grab our GE nippers, okay? And so they don't need to be big, but these are designated only for nails, okay? These are diamond nippers. You could pick these up at a Jack's or Bumgar's or some ranch farm and supply store. They're not expensive. They still have a pretty good drop on them and everything else, but they're just to cut nails. And so I don't spend a whole lot of money. Most people wouldn't recommend that you need to spend the money on a good set of nail nippers. All they're going to do is, we could grab a nail right here. All they're going to do is, again, once we've driven that nail into that horse's foot and we have excess sticking out, very easily, see if I can grab the other side, we're going to take that and just simply cut that nail. And you can see, again, nippers made for cutting steel, okay? So good nail nippers, again, something useful to have around, but really just for that shoeing process. If you're just going to trim some horses, you have a few things in your tack room, you don't need a set of nail nippers, just that hoof knife, rasp, and general set of hoof nippers, okay? But never use those hoof nippers on nails themselves. If you start using these good nippers on nails, you'll ding up this entire edge right here, and this will no longer close tightly, okay? And again, you're going to start going through that hoof wall. You no longer cleanly go through that, and then when you go to peel that piece off, you're going to start ripping it instead of cutting all the way through, okay? So that's your nippers. Now we're getting into pieces of equipment that are used more in the shoeing process. Again, next week we will go into what that looks like, but let's just talk about some of those pieces of equipment. And so clinchers are something that is used to basically turn over that nail. And so once you've driven that nail through that horse's foot, you've got a piece of nail sticking up, okay, out of that horse's foot. And if you don't bend it over on the hoof wall, man, that shoe will come just right back off, okay? I could take pull-offs and easily pull it right back off. That horse goes and walks outside and does much of anything. Maybe they get in some mud or just start walking around, and it'll eventually pull right off, okay? The way that we keep that shoe on there is to drive those nails into that hoof and then bend them over, okay? And so that's what we mean by clinching them, okay? And these clinchers do just that, okay? There's two main styles. The one that you see on the top is this right here. These are just what we call saddle horse clinchers. This is the most common style that is out there. And so this is easily going to be a nail that's driven up through that horse's foot. And then these clinchers are going to come over and they're just going to bend that over and again have this nice kind of hook on it that retains that shoe. The bottom set of clinchers that you see there would be called gooseneck clinchers. Not quite as common, but some others that you might see on the market, okay? Now, when we talk about the teeth wearing out, that's just simply these teeth over time. As they do start to wear out, it's kind of a two-step process when we're clinching. We start to fold that nail over, and then it's pressed into the hoof. I'll show you that more when we do some demos a little later in the semester. But as these teeth start to wear out, they start slipping on the nail, and they no longer actually clinch it tightly. Again, time for a new set of clinchers at that point in time. But definitely something you need on your shoeing box if you're going to be putting shoes on. Clinch block. A clinch block is nothing fancy. You don't go out and spend a whole lot of money on a clinch block. It's basically just a heavy piece of steel, okay? This is the exact same as the one that you see up there. This one's just made by Diamond. You can buy them from all different manufacturers. Some people make them themselves out of a block of steel. But this is used to set those nails before we actually clinch them down. And so people call this blocking as a step. We'll talk about blocking next week. But we've already driven the nails through our horse's foot, shoes on. We're going to trim off the excess there, just leave a tiny little stub of that nail. And then we're going to put this clinch block underneath the nail like you see in this bottom picture right here. And then we're going to come around and we're going to start tapping on that nail head that we're holding the underside to as well. And it's going to seat that shoe down on there tight, part of this blocking process. And so if we have a heavy piece of steel right there under that nail, we're hitting from the top, it's going to seat it down on there, drive it out, and then we're going to clinch it over, okay? And so that's all this clinch block is used for. Nothing fancy. Clinch cutter is another item that you would find on somebody's shoeing box. And so when it comes down to removing shoes, there's two main ways that you guys would remove shoes. Maybe you need to pull a shoe. The first of those would be to use that rasp that we previously discussed, and you can rasp off the clinches. So where we've turned that nail over, you can rasp that area off so it's just now straight, okay? You can also use a clinch cutter. A clinch cutter is really this device that you see right here, and we're really talking about this portion of it, okay? It's also what you see in just that standalone one on the bottom picture, okay? And so this is basically just a sharp knife that you see here. It's made to, as we're holding that horse's foot up, get underneath that turned over nail and then bend it back up in the opposite direction, and then we can remove that shoe. And so it basically cuts that clinch and then folds it upright as well. If you do have a nail that's maybe stuck in the hoof as well, you can use this side as a little bit of a punch. And so we can start to hammer that nail out and then maybe take a set of pull-offs or something and then pull it from there. But it allows us to get into some of those small little nail holes and push out little bits that maybe start to break off sometimes. Can also double as a hoof pick if you really want. Most people likely just keep a hoof pick around. We've all made different ones over time of things laying around. But keep some a different hoof pick on there, or you could use that other side of the clinch cutter, the punch, okay? But again, you're going to remove nails one of either two ways: rasp off those clinches or use that clinch cutter, okay? Pull-offs. Now, I told you, again, if I was to recommend a handful of things that you would have in your tack room or laying around the barn, even if you're not a farrier, it would be those three things that we use for trimming. So that hoof knife, again, paring away any dead sole, keeping it concave, that rasp, and also a set of hoof nippers. Those would be three things. And then the last one that I would recommend to you would be a set of pull-offs, okay? These are used to remove shoes. You can pull out nail stubs and things as well, but really, again, the heart of this is to remove shoes, pull off shoes. That's hence the name pull-offs, okay? Could also be used as nail cutters, depends on the point on them, but they'll generally cut through that. The one thing to note about pull-offs as compared to other tools in your shoeing box is they're always going to have knobs on the end of them or some different end of the reins to make them distinguishable at a glance. And so you're not going down and grabbing your pull-offs when you really want your nippers. And you need to be able to see the back end of all your tools. And so you'll notice these pull-offs in the picture have two little knobs. Mine are made by St. Croix. And so mine have basically a turned rein on one side and then a knob on the other. But this looks very different than, say, the reins. I mean, not far off in terms of the length, but you can easily look and tell these are the pull-offs and then these are my hoof nippers, okay? So you're not going to confuse them. That's why the reins look different there on the end, okay? But these pull-offs don't have quite the point on them, if you can tell, that our hoof nippers did. They're not made to cut through hoof wall, okay? And so this is something that, again, these have really good drop on them. I really like this pair. Again, these are St. Croix. But we've cut those clinches, we rasped our clinches off, and at that point we can take our pull-offs and then we can take and get between the actual shoe and the hoof itself with these pull-offs, and then from there we can just use kind of a little popping action around and we'll take that shoe clean off with these pull-offs. And so again, if I was to recommend something else to have around your barn, it would be these right here. Good set of pull-offs. You don't need to spend a ton of money on these. I do like a set that has a good drop to it versus just pulling with two hands to pry them open. But again, that's all we're looking at here with our pull-offs. Crease nail puller. Crease nail puller is pretty much as the name implies, used to pull nails though once they've been driven into the shoe. And so if you remember on our shoe, we typically have either that foldering tool that's gone through, or on our keg shoe, we have a crease that's already there inset. Once we drive that nail head and it's sitting down into the crease of that shoe, we can no longer take our driving hammer and take the back end of a hammer. We can no longer get that nail head because now it's sitting down inside the crease. And so if you've driven that nail in the wrong spot, maybe it's a little bit too low, you want to redrive it, and you've already nailed it in all the way, there's no getting it back out with the back end of a driving hammer. And so what we use is crease nail pullers, okay? Crease nail pullers are looking just like this. You can see a picture of them open on the PowerPoint over here. And so these crease nail pullers, they've got a neat little tapered end to them. This tapered end that you see right here is made to fit down into the crease of that horseshoe. And then this open end right here is unique because if we take a nail, that nail head fits very easily into these crease nail pullers. And so you guys can see how that fits into that slot right there. And if this nail was sitting down inside that horseshoe, again, this easily gets down into that crease, grabs our nail, and then we can pry it out, remove our nail, and redrive a new one, okay? And so if you're going to be shoeing, you gotta have a set of crease nail pullers. Like I said, otherwise there's no way to get that nail out once it's been driven, okay? Can also be used to pull nails from pads, but again, the main function is going to be pulling it from the crease of that horseshoe. Okay, now let's talk about something else that is very useful for any farrier, and that's going to be a hoof stand. There's lots of hoof stands out on the market. This is used to hold feet up for clinching, and so we can put the foot up on the hoof stand, clinch those nails, turn them over, also dress up that foot all the way around, remove any flares around that edge on the bottom a little bit, anything else that needs done. Now, I will tell you, in a lot of farrier schools, and farrier school for me, they didn't let us use hoof stands. They said you're going to get used to using your knee. That way, if you're in a bind, you have a horse that's acting up, he's flipping over a hoof stand, and you're not able to use that, you do know how to get by. And so we did everything on our knee at that time, but having a hoof stand is definitely a saving grace and something that's is quite nice. I would always recommend, I'm not endorsing any specific product or hate to be, if there's something similar, then I'm a fan of it, but the hoof jack that's out there, this green hoof stand that you see in the top right of this PowerPoint, to me it really is the best hoof stand out on the market. I would say a large majority of farriers have this hoof stand right here, and I've never seen anything that compares to it. In the bottom right there is a steel hoof stand. And the thing about this is safety. And constantly you see a horse that maybe is pushing on this and they start leaning back and then they flip over the hoof stand. Maybe they spook, okay? Years ago, we had a polo pony that flipped it over onto a steel hoof stand, went through the abdomen, ended up losing the horse as a result of it. And sure, that's a freak accident, something that could happen. But these plastic hoof stands, I've got one back here to show you. These plastic hoof stands are completely safe, okay? This flips over. There's nothing that's going to hurt a horse. I'm sure they might bruise themselves or something on this, same as you if you trip over it, but there's nothing damaging on this. It's got a rubber stopper on the top up here, and then this is just all plastic, okay? There's no sharp-pointed steel on this. It can bounce, roll over all over the place, and it's, again, extremely safe. And so to me, you really got to keep the safety of you and that horse in mind, and there's no better than this. Now, this is also nice because this has an adjustable stand right here, and so this can move up and down to match the height of the horse, okay? You're shoeing a little pony, or tomorrow you're shoeing a draft horse, and so this can easily be raised way up and then tightened down, and then from there, we can easily adjust the height of our hoof stand, okay? And so I think our camera is momentarily paused. Hopefully it'll come back here. And so that hoof stand is a great thing that you guys can have around. And so now we're back here. And so aside from the fact that it's adjustable, you can also pull out this stand right here and you can put in a cradle. I didn't bring the cradle up to the office to be able to show you, but you can see the picture of it on the PowerPoint right here. Okay, this is great if you are trimming the hind end or doing shoeing on the hind end of a horse, and maybe they're older, or geriatric, they just can't pick up that hind leg very far, especially to get it in between your legs. You can set it on that cradle, and it's a whole lot easier for that horse to be able to just rest their hind leg on that cradle in line with their body, not twerked out. And again, they stay and stand still a whole lot better in utilizing that. The other nice thing about this hoof stand is you got two magnets right here. Might seem silly, but when you're trimming horses, you only need three things, right? You've got your hoof knife on you already. It's sitting in your chaps. I showed you that here a little bit ago. And then the only other thing we need is a set of nippers and our rasp. And so we can easily take our nippers, throw them onto our hoof stand, and then we can take maybe our good rasp and move it onto this magnet. And then I can go out and trim horses. Okay, I can pretty much just grab my hoof stand, walk along down the aisle, down the tie rail, whatever that looks like, and I've got everything I need to be able to trim horses. Maybe somebody else is going to come back behind and start putting shoes on. And so it's, again, a great hoof stand to have around. I can't think of a better product that I would recommend. Again, they're not too expensive and pricey. If you're looking for something else to keep in the tack room, just some basics, this would probably be the next thing. Again, you'd have that hoof knife, you'd have your nippers, the hoof nippers, your rasp, a set of pull-offs, and then just a decent hoof stand is not a bad idea either. And then you're set. If you're going to start doing shoeing, that's a whole nother ballgame, okay? But again, we're going to continue to talk about that process. So beyond that hoof stand, a few other little things I want to mention to you guys. The next one of those is this hoof gauge, okay? And so we talked about angles in our first lecture. It's just a bit of a refresher. We've mentioned it before in 102, kind of this comfort zone of 48 to 55 degrees or so. Also the fact that hopefully, we're not going to try to dictate a particular angle. That dorsal hoof wall should match the pastern angle, should match our horse's shoulder angle, right? But not a bad idea to check the angle as well. And so our two front feet should match or be pretty close in angle, and our two hind feet should be pretty close in angle. They're going to be a little bit steeper, but they should match each other. And so especially starting out, if you're not sure how much you're taking in terms of foot, check the angle. And so a hoof gauge allows you to be able to do that, okay? You see a different style on the PowerPoint there in the top. I really like these. And so again, it is all just what you get used to. These are made here in the States, really quality brand, all aluminum. This just sits on the bottom of that horse's foot, right? Either we're on top of the shoe or on top of that barefoot horse. And then this changes angle to match that dorsal hoof wall. And so we can all of a sudden move this down. It's now touching the dorsal hoof wall. And then we can read this right here. It says right now we're looking at 55 degrees, okay? And so easy way to be able to put this on a horse's foot and check angle. And I highly recommend you having one of these on your shoeing box. Even if you get to a point where you're not using it as much and you feel pretty confident with how much foot you're taking off and the angles match from front foot to front foot and left to right. But great thing to have around. Sometimes you're recording it. Sometimes depending on the discipline of horse, it's a little bit more imperative that we note and keep track of the angle as well. The next thing that we could mention that kind of relates to that would be a wing divider. Nothing fancy. You see a picture here in the bottom of that PowerPoint. Wing divider is great for measuring and keeping track of toe length. Or if you're going to build a shoe and make a shoe from scratch, you might use this to do various points. You can flip it around to mirror them and then know where to start turning that shoe around. And so that wing divider has a threaded area that can basically allow this to open up. We can then take this and close it down. We can match this to our toe length and say, okay, this is from horse's coronary band to the bottom of the hoof wall. And then we can also record, take measurements, and keep track of that toe length as well. And so I keep a small little tape measure sitting in the shoeing box, and then we can easily take this across and say, okay, this is exactly 3.5 inches. And so I'm not sure I can show you guys that. But we can say that's 3.5 inches right there, and that's our horse's toe length. And so wing divider would be another useful tool that you guys could keep on a shoeing box. But again, unless you're doing frequent shoeing, wouldn't quite be a necessity. Various hammers that exist, okay? And so the first two are something that could be on your shoeing box. The last one, if and not some other types of hammers as well, would either be on your truck or next to your anvil. we'll go down in a bit and talk a little bit more about that anvil and some pieces to that. And so the first would be just to have an economy hammer on your shoeing box. And so this is just another word of saying this cheap hammer. Okay, you can go to Jack's, Bumgar's, any farm and ranch supply store. This is a diamond hammer. I bet it was less than 30 bucks. Okay, and so nothing fancy. But what this is going to be used for is when, say, we are blocking, okay, or tapping those clinches down, anything on steel to steel. And so if we're beating on the top of that shoe and we've got our clinch block under that nail head, again, I'm not trying to just, rough up our good driving hammer. And so I'm just going to have a cheap economy hammer. Some people use a driving hammer. It can be a little hard on it over time. You might loosen the head of it up. The head of this one's getting a little bit loose. We can drive this wedge down in the top of this hammer a little bit more to tighten that up. But having an economy hammer around for various purposes is not a bad idea. Next would be your good hammer. This would be your driving hammer. So actually used for driving nails and ringing them off, okay? They can be rung off with the back end of this hammer. You can easily just put this over top of your nail, and then we may bend it down and tap, or we may then, once it's in the hoof, actually just take and twist this with the back of our driving hammer, and it will just ring that nail clean off, okay? And then from at the end, we'll talk about that process again next week. We'll trim them up even more, talk about blocking them, clinching them over. But a good driving hammer is very useful, okay? Recommended weights to these would be 12 to 14 ounces. This is a 12-ounce driving hammer. Again, most people will spend a good bit of money on a driving hammer. You want something that feels good in your hand, very easy to drive nails. You can hear it and feel it, absolutely, when you're driving a nail in terms of, if I want to drive it higher up the hoof wall, I can kind of start tapping it slowly. All of a sudden, I'm ready to come out. I can nail it home. And then it's going to all of a sudden pop out of that hoof wall. These nails have a taper to them, okay? And so when you're talking about a consumable, that taper, that checkered side is always towards the frog. We'll talk about that process next week, but it's set up in a fashion that it is going to come out of that hoof wall. And the faster we drive it, the quicker it's going to pop out, okay? And so having a good driving hammer is really something that if you're doing a lot of shoeing, you want to invest in. You don't have to. On the back of this and some of the driving hammers, we've got little magnets. Again, you can reach over to your shoeing box and easily, if I need one more nail, we can just grab that nail and then all of a sudden continue to put that into our shoe. So good driving hammer. That rounding hammer is something that you're going to have around for shaping of shoes. And so it's going to have a flat surface on one side and a rounded one on the other, but it's made for working on that anvil, shaping those front shoes, hind shoes, turning those quarters, heels, etc. And that's something when we go down to the anvil here in a bit, we'll show you a little bit more of. Anvil, I've got a handout that looks like this that I'm going to post on Canvas that just basically goes over the different regions of the anvil and tells you what they're used for. And so I'll post this on Canvas as a good reference. Again, we'll go down and we'll look at an anvil here momentarily, and I'll kind of point out some of the different features on that. The top of that anvil, the face of that anvil, really being used for shaping shoes. We can draw clips off of the face or even off part of the horn over here. And then this hardy hole is about in here. I'll show you that on the anvil downstairs. We can put various attachments in there, not just to cut steel. There are some pad cutters that go into that hardy hole. But again, we can also put various attachments in there that do allow us to, in fact, cut steel. Forge, I'll pull out a forge and show you just ever so briefly down by the anvil. But again, I think we'll take a lab at a class at the end of the semester. We'll talk a little bit more about some forge work and shaping of shoes. And so we can have coal or gas forges. I learned on coal forges, you got to watch your heat a little bit more. They got a blower on them. We used to do Pocahontas coal, and a great way to be able to learn how to forge steel. But if you get to talking to somebody and you forget your steel is in that coal fire, it will burn up and you go to find it and there's nothing left. Whereas with a gas forge, maxes out at a temperature near about 1800. It's a good working heat. It's about red hot, bright red, very easy for bending and working that steel. Okay, and so most people on a truck these days are all going to have a gas forge. Tongs are something I'll show you down by the anvil just for handling those shoes when they're hot. You can't touch them with your bare hands, but you still need a way to hold on to those shoes to be able to actually shape them, flatten them, etc. And tongs are going to be your aid in doing that. I'll show you downstairs. Chaps and apron is something that is a safety precaution that you should always have if you're going to be trimming and shoeing horses. And so this is not a fancy pair of chaps. I really do like these though. They are canvas down here, and then they've got leather surrounding your legs. And so this is something that you guys would wear. You easily have pockets on here for your hoof knives, but the hope here is to protect those horseshoers' legs from any driven nails before they're actually finished and clenched over, as well as any maybe hot shoes that come in contact with your legs. And so, give you an example, if you've got a horseshoe that you've driven that nails into that horse's foot, you wrung off all those nails. When you wring those nails off, man, you've got a stub sticking out that is sharp, okay? Some horse gets impatient. You've got that horse's foot between your legs, and there's no stopping them, right? This 1,000-pound animal, they just rip that foot out right in between your legs, okay? And you better hope you don't have a hand in the way because, again, it can slice through your hand, but it's absolutely protecting your legs. That's what those chaps are there for, okay? If you just had jeans on, or heaven forbid, much less than that, it'll rip clean through those jeans, okay? And so you really, I recommend you got to have chaps on, some type of apron. And again, it is handy to have the pockets in there as well, hold those knives, but really, again, we have that leather there to protect you for a reason. And again, you think about somebody on a motorcycle, they wear leather for a reason because it is extremely durable, okay? Prevents road rash. You can take some nails, you can try to pull through it, and it's going to stay intact, okay? It might mar it up a little bit, but it's going to protect you. And so I highly recommend you wearing some chaps. Okay, everyone. So now that we've gone over all the various shoeing tools, I told you we'd come down. I wanted to show you kind of the parts of the anvil, talk a little bit about maybe some different hammers, and then we'll mention a few bits on the forge right here. And so this is an average size anvil that you would take to maybe a barn, keep on the truck. You'll see on the handout that I post on Canvas, it's good to have a 75, 80, 90 pound anvil that you take with you. This one unlocks from the stand right here. Can easily be picked up and moved around. Many people in their shop or at home, as they practice forging, blacksmithing, etc., might have a much larger anvil. We have some 150-pound anvils laying around, but they're a beast to move. And so this is really a good size. These are made by NC Tool. There's a lot of different manufacturers of anvils out there, but definitely something that if you're shoeing is a necessity, okay? So a few pieces of the anvil. This front portion here is considered the horn of the anvil. Many of our front patterns are shaped on the horn. I've got a shoe sitting right here. And so if I wanted to open up this shoe and again make it a little bit wider right here, I could easily put it on top of this anvil, beat on the top portion of it with my rounding hammer. And I would open that shoe right there, okay? And we'll talk more again about maybe shaping shoes and some forging, like I said in that last lecture. Right here in the center of or in the back of the horn, right after the drop, this is the drop from the top of the face down to the horn. We've got a small drop, and then we've got a little about 1 inch by 1 inch hole right here. This is what I was telling you is considered the Hardy hole, okay? And there's a lot of things you can put into the Hardy hole. Some people might have a pad cutter that slips into there, and you can crank around and cut that leather pad. Classic one is an attachment to be able to cut steel. And so this is just something that can sit into that Hardy hole. Makes it nice and stationary. We can take steel out of our forge right here, set it across the top of this attachment, beat down on top of it, and we can easily cut this steel. We wouldn't want to do it cold. We would just flatten this edge right here, but when it is red hot, we can cut right through that. And so there's a lot of attachments that might go into that Hardy hole right there. Okay. From there, we would come back, and this is the actual face of our anvil right here, okay? This is the largest portion, and so this is where we're going to be flattening shoes, okay, and leveling things. And so if this shoe has just a hair bit of rock to it, and so if we're going to flatten this shoe out, we could easily take this and then move all the way around this in a circular motion, keeping as much surface area as possible on the top of this anvil, and we can flatten it out. And so this is used to level those shoes. Back behind that, you've got a few holes. This backmost hole, you guys probably can't see a whole lot in regards to size, but this back one is what we would consider to be a pritchel hole. And so if I'm going to open up some of these nail holes a little bit, I could take something like a pritchel. I could go over top of that pritchel hole, and then I can easily, again, open up that hole right there, okay? It's basically just allowing this tool to go down through that, obviously without hitting on our actual anvil itself. You've got a larger hole that sits in here, great for, again, could be taking a shoe, maybe I need to turn a heel branch in, I can pop it through this hole and then all of a sudden take this and bend this heel branch in a little bit. Every anvil has some different features. This one on the side that you guys can't see, closest to me obviously, this is how I would work on this anvil standing right here. So this side has some turning cams on it. Basically, it's just two studs sticking off the side of this anvil that, if you guys can see right now, this shoe is hanging by itself, okay? And so it allows you to move this shoe around within those turning cams, and then I can take and say, well, I want to turn this heel branch in a little bit. I can take this and beat on it and then turn that heel branch in. And so an anvil is very, very useful. Again, front patterns worked up here. We might do a lot more with our heel patterns here on the hind end, okay, of this anvil. So on the back end, more heel patterns. Front of the anvil on the horn, more front patterns. Leveling the shoes here. Again, we might turn the heel branch or something up through this hole, Pritchell hole, turning cams on the side of this one, and then that Hardy hole. There's some oftentimes various places you could do it, either on the face of the anvil here or on the side of the horn here. We can take and draw a clip off of this area. And so we could do that on the face, like I said, or on this area right here. We could take our rounding hammer. Some people also might have a cross peen hammer or ball peen hammer and prefer to draw clips like that. You'll see what the farriers do in our demos a little bit later on. Again, I classically just use a rounding hammer. We could take this shoe while top and then draw a clip and a piece of steel off right here, okay? And so very, very useful in terms of different features. With that being said, this is that classic rounding hammer. So it's somewhat rounded on one side, flat on the other, but this is what we're going to use to be able to shape those shoes, okay? And so absolute necessity that we need on our stand, okay? A couple other things that you'll see sitting here. We talked briefly about the use of tongs. Tongs are just something that allow us to hold on to this shoe firmly and securely, not going anywhere. It's nice and tight. These are made by Bloom Forge, so they're decent quality tongs. They got good drop to them. They're not going to take two hands to open them. Again, you can see if we take these, again, very easily, they will just open and we can grab that shoe, okay? This is made so that, we'll talk about that forge in a minute, but we could take something out of our forge over to our anvil and then be able to work that shoe around. We can flatten it. We could turn something still up through the anvil, but we can manipulate it while it's hot without burning ourselves. Obviously, we can't touch this shoe, okay? And so tongs are just very useful. There's different size tongs to match different sizes of shoes. You want this to grip very tightly and firmly. If you had tongs that did not match the size of shoe, you might beat on it and then the shoe falls out. Not something you want, okay? Aside from tongs, main other thing sitting on here would be just another rasp. And so if we are going to take a little bit of material off of this shoe right here, we could easily rasp some. I've got a clamp set up over here, and then I could put this in once it's red hot and rasp on this shoe and easily take some material off. I could round off the toe a little bit, but I've got a rasp dedicated to only steel, right? I wouldn't want this to be the rasp that I use on the bottom of our hoof while we're leveling that, okay? Beyond that, we've got a brush. When we talk about forging, we'll remove some scale from that actual shoe itself. This is a peg shoe that we've been playing with a little bit. When we talked about consumables, you saw some nails upstairs. Those were combo head number 5s, pretty common in a 4 and 5 range. This is a aught shoe, okay? And so as we go from aught smaller, it'd be a double aught, triple aught, to tiny little shoes that you might put on that little pony. We can go upward from this aught to a 1, 2, 3, and so on. That 3 on that big warm blood, somewhere in this aught to 1 on our average quarter horse likely, okay? Just depends on the size of feet, obviously. And so this crease right here is where those crease nail pullers I told you would come in handy. You drive a nail down into that crease, you could easily pull it out with those crease nail pullers, okay? Real quick, forge I've got sitting here. This is a nice forge. This is a 2-burner forge, and so you can see both burners here. These are all gas forges. Like I told you, anything somebody's gonna have on a truck these days, they're not gonna put a coal forge on their truck. They're all gonna be gas. Nice thing about that is it's never gonna get too hot
per se that it's going to melt your steel. Okay, it gets it to a nice working temperature. Steel melts give or take about 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. This is only going to get to about 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, and so this has open ends on it. The nice thing about these open ends is we could put a piece of bar stock all the way through this forge, heat it up while it's nice and long, and then take it to our anvil, cut it, and be able to shape shoes. We can also open this forge up, grab it by our wooden handle. This whole thing is all insulated. This is an insulated liner in here. And again, that's what's retaining a lot of the heat inside that forge. You can replace those liners every so often. But very easily, we've got this shelf that we can set our shoes on. And so we can set it in here just like so. We'll close our lid down, get it red hot. We can grab our shoe right here, take it out, and then start working on our anvil. And so a forge is another necessary piece. Most people, if they're going to shape shoes, obviously while they're hot, they're going to hot fit them as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later as you start to see some demos, people going out and doing that hot fitting process, okay? You can shape shoes cold. You don't have to shape everything hot. We used to shape shoes cold all the time. We just, in the middle of summertime, man, East Coast, just 100% humidity and nearly 100 degrees outside. The last thing I want is to be standing next to this forge. A little more work, but you can absolutely shape them cold on your anvil. So don't think that you have to do everything hot. If you want to play around with shaping some shoes, you can do that completely cold. And so again, I hope you know a little bit more now about forge here. You guys will see a little bit of a demo at the end. Like I said, maybe we'll shape some shoes on the anvil, talk a little bit more about some cool forge work, and then just naturally through the demos, you'll see people working on the anvil here. But I wanted you to know some of the basic pieces of the anvil. This right here would be the waist. The smaller the waist is, the more an anvil might ring. People will put a magnet on there to dampen sometime. Lots of different stands. People put them on stumps, all kinds of things. Doesn't matter to you, it's all personal preference, but you understand the basics to the anvil and what it might be used for.
And so with that, if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. And we'll, again, continue on next week talking about the shoeing and the trimming process itself. I look forward to talking in the future. We'll do some demos. I'm excited about those demos with both the English and the Western performance horses. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks so much.